Imagine someone telling you that your mind is far sharper than you believe, yet the proof of that brilliance rarely shows up in the way you expect. Instead of polished displays of confidence, it tends to appear through odd, subtle behaviors that don't look impressive at all. Maybe you forget ordinary things but solve complex problems effortlessly. Maybe you look distracted when in reality you're analyzing everything. Maybe people assume you're confused when you're simply processing the world in a way they can't see. This contradiction is confusing for the people around you, but even more confusing for you. And that's exactly where our conversation begins. Because one of the biggest ironies about high-level intelligence is that it often hides itself in plain sight. It doesn't announce its presence with fanfare. It doesn't demand admiration. It doesn't try to look sophisticated. Instead, it works quietly, almost secretly, operating behind your daily thoughts while you go about your routine, unaware of the extraordinary patterns running beneath everything. Richard Feynman, the playful physicist known for his drums, puzzles, unconventional explanations, and sharp humor, loved pointing out this exact paradox. He used to say that the best way to discover what you truly understand is to try explaining it to someone who knows nothing. And when you do that, you're forced to realize something surprising. You understand more than you ever noticed in some areas, and far less in others. But the fascinating part isn't the less, it's the more. Feynman had this almost childlike ability to notice significance where others saw nothing. He could take a simple question and turn it into a doorway to deeper understanding. Because of this unusual way of seeing the world, people often mistook his relaxed, humorous style for a lack of seriousness. But in reality, his seemingly casual attitude hid a mind operating at full speed, dissecting assumptions, examining details, rearranging ideas, and revealing truths through curiosity rather than arrogance. That brings us to something about yourself that you may have never considered. Real intelligence rarely looks the way society imagines. It doesn't always show up as quick answers. It doesn't always appear as flawless confidence. It doesn't present itself as perfection, order, and certainty. Often, it expresses itself in subtle, even strange patterns that feel more like quirks than strengths. And because of that, many people spend years misinterpreting their own mental abilities, labeling signs of depth as flaws. Think about those moments when you drift off while everyone else stays focused, not because you're bored, but because your thoughts naturally travel through interconnected ideas. Think about the times when simple tasks feel uninteresting but complex problems pull you in effortlessly. Think about those situations when you ask a question others consider too basic, yet that simple question exposes a flaw in the entire explanation. These moments, which people sometimes criticize, can be signs of a rare mental structure, one that operates beneath the surface, quietly shaping ideas, forming patterns, and discovering meaning where others only see routine. It's a type of intelligence that doesn't rely on appearances or external approval. A type that hides because it functions inwardly, constantly examining, refining, and reorganizing the world. And here's the most intriguing part. People who think this way almost never consider themselves truly intelligent. They're too busy questioning everything, noticing holes in their own reasoning, comparing themselves to ideal forms of knowledge that no one actually possesses. They underestimate their abilities precisely because they see the complexity that others ignore. They think they know too little, when in reality, they understand deeply. Today, we're going to explore this hidden side of intelligence the way Feynman would. Playfully, honestly, and with a touch of irony. We're going to look at the subtle behaviors your brain uses to disguise your real capabilities, the habits you might have dismissed as weaknesses even though they're indicators of remarkable cognitive strength, and the quiet thought patterns that reveal more about your intelligence than any test, label, or compliment ever could. So get ready, because if you've ever felt that you think differently, not dramatically, but in that peculiar way that has followed you all your life, there's a good chance you're about to understand why your own mind keeps hiding the truth from you, and how that hidden truth might be far greater than you realize. There's something almost humorous about the way highly capable minds operate. The smarter a person is, the more likely they are to underestimate themselves. It sounds backwards, but it happens because a strong mind doesn't feel strong from the inside. It feels curious, doubtful, restless, constantly aware of how much more there is to understand. And that constant awareness creates a strange paradox. The people who know the most often feel like they know the least. Richard Feynman loved to poke fun at this contradiction. Whenever someone called him a genius, he would shrug and laugh, almost offended by the idea. Not because he was pretending to be humble, but because his mind was always buzzing with unanswered questions. Every new discovery made him realize how vast the unknown really was. To him, confidence based solely on what someone already knew was a sign of limitation, not brilliance. And this brings us to the silent paradox hiding inside many people. True intelligence doesn't feel like superiority. It feels like endless exploration. Instead of focusing on accomplishments, it notices gaps. Instead of celebrating certainty, it examines possibilities. Instead of saying, "I'm good at this," it says, "I still don't understand enough." That internal tension creates a mental landscape where ability and self-doubt walk side by side, each feeding the other in surprising ways. Think about it. When a topic feels easy for you, you don't think, "Wow, I must be extremely talented." You think, "This is obvious. If I understand it, everyone must understand it." But that assumption isn't true. The only reason it feels obvious is because your brain processes it naturally, quickly, intuitively. It feels simple not because it is simple, but because you are skilled in that area. Yet the mind rarely gives itself credit for that. It assumes that the rest of the world sees things the same way. This is one of the clearest ways intelligence hides itself, by turning difficult things into ordinary experiences. You don't notice the complexity because your brain compresses it so elegantly that it barely feels like effort. Meanwhile, someone else observing your thinking might describe it as advanced, structured, or unusually insightful. But you don't see any of that. You just see your own thoughts doing what they always do. Another subtle part of this paradox is the constant internal criticism. People with sharp analytical thinking tend to evaluate themselves with the same precision they apply to concepts. They break down their own reasoning, questioning whether their conclusions are logical, whether their arguments are well supported, whether they overlooked something obvious. This self-evaluation looks like insecurity from the outside, but it's actually the result of heightened awareness. It's not weakness, it's refinement. Feynman embodied this perfectly. He questioned everything, including his own assumptions. He didn't trust conclusions just because they felt correct. He wanted to verify, test, examine, repeat. And because he viewed knowledge as something flexible and unfinished, he never saw himself as superior to anyone, even though most people saw him as exceptional. He simply recognized the limits of his understanding more clearly than others recognized their own. This is why intelligent people often feel out of place. They're not pretending. They genuinely think they fall short. Their minds are tuned to look for flaws, inconsistencies, missing details, in everything, including themselves. Meanwhile, those who know less often overestimate themselves because they don't see the complexity that a sharper mind naturally sees. So the paradox becomes clear. The deeper your understanding, the more you notice the infinity of what you don't know. And the more you notice that infinity, the easier it is to believe you're not as capable as people think. That quiet humility, however, is itself a powerful indicator of intelligence. It shows that your awareness extends beyond the surface, that your curiosity is stronger than your ego, and that your thinking reaches further than the boundaries most people stop at. This section exists for one purpose: to help you recognize that what you might interpret as uncertainty could actually be a sign of advanced thinking. The doubt you feel isn't a flaw, it's a byproduct of awareness. The simplicity you perceive in your own reasoning doesn't mean it's ordinary. It means you're naturally aligned with concepts that others struggle with. And the moments when you feel like you should know more might be the very moments when your intelligence is operating at its fullest. One of the most fascinating things about the human mind is its ability to disguise its own strengths. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but simply because the way you experience your thinking is completely different from the way the outside world sees it. You live inside your thoughts, so nothing feels unusual to you, but others only see the result of your reasoning, and sometimes that result looks extraordinary. The brain has several subtle ways of masking your cognitive abilities, and most people never notice what's happening. In fact, many individuals spend years believing they're average or even inadequate, without realizing that the very patterns they consider unremarkable are signs of heightened intelligence. And the strangest part? Those signs often look like the opposite of what you'd expect. Let's start with one of the most common disguises: effortless thinking. When something feels easy to you, your mind automatically assumes it must be easy for everyone else. If you grasp a concept quickly, it doesn't feel like talent. It just feels normal. If you make intuitive connections others don't see, it doesn't feel like insight. It feels obvious. If you solve problems without consciously breaking them into steps, your brain doesn't congratulate itself. It simply moves on, as if nothing special happened. And because you don't feel the effort, you don't perceive the ability. But the lack of effort is the ability. Another powerful disguise is constant mental movement. Highly intelligent people often have minds that run in multiple directions at once. Thoughts jump from idea to idea, not randomly, but through invisible logical links that other people don't notice. You might be labeled as distracted or unfocused, when in reality you're processing information at a deeper level. While others think in straight lines, your mind builds structures, maps, connections. But because this happens internally, quietly, automatically, you assume it's ordinary. It's not. Then there's the habit of questioning everything. Many intelligent people grew up being told they overthink, make things complicated, or ask too many questions. But this tendency isn't a flaw, it's a feature, an essential mechanism of advanced reasoning. The brain that questions is the brain that learns. Yet from the inside, this behavior doesn't feel like intelligence. It feels like doubt, curiosity, or even annoyance. You think you're being difficult or slow when you ask for clarification, but in reality, you're digging for accuracy. You're refusing superficial understanding, and that refusal is one of the most precise indicators of intellectual depth. Another way intelligence hides itself is through imposter feelings, not the dramatic, paralyzing kind, but that subtle sensation that you're not as capable as people imagine. You might feel that you're only good at certain things because you got lucky, started early, or simply paid attention. But what you call luck is often pattern recognition. What you call starting early is usually intrinsic fascination. What you call just paying attention is disciplined curiosity. Your brain attributes your strengths to external circumstances because it doesn't realize those behaviors are expressions of your own capacity. There's also the phenomenon of rapid forgetfulness in specific contexts. Not forgetfulness as in memory problems, but the fact that once you understand something deeply, you often forget what it felt like not to understand it. This creates the illusion that the knowledge was simple from the start. Because you no longer feel the difficulty, your brain erases all evidence of the skill it took to learn it. It hides the learning curve, leaving behind only the final clarity. So you conclude that the content must have been easy. But it wasn't. You just absorbed it faster than you realized. And perhaps the most surprising disguise of all is the tendency to focus on what you don't know, rather than what you do. People with stronger cognitive profiles naturally notice gaps, inconsistencies, and missing details. Instead of feeling satisfaction with their knowledge, they feel aware of its limits. This awareness creates the illusion of inadequacy. But that very awareness, the ability to detect what is missing, is itself a sign of advanced intelligence. The less you see, the more confident you become. The more you see, the more humble you feel. Your brain hides your intelligence because it doesn't feel like intelligence. It feels like your normal experience of thinking, familiar, unchanged, unremarkable. You compare yourself to an imaginary ideal of genius and assume you don't measure up. Meanwhile, other people see your abilities with far more clarity than you ever will. This section exists to reveal one truth. The signs of your intelligence might be hiding in the places you least expect. Not in what feels impressive, but in what feels natural. Richard Feynman had an unusual approach to understanding anything. He believed that true knowledge only becomes visible when you try to explain it simply. Not elegantly, not academically, not with fancy vocabulary, but simply as if you were teaching a child who has never heard the concept before. And this method, which later became known as the Feynman technique, reveals something incredibly profound. You know far more than you think, but your brain keeps that understanding hidden until you try to express it. This idea may sound almost contradictory. Most people believe that explaining something exposes what they don't know. And that's partly true, but it also exposes what they do know, often surprisingly well. It forces the mind to translate complex internal structures into clear, accessible language. That translation makes invisible knowledge visible. It turns intuition into understanding. It transforms vague familiarity into clarity. The reason this works is simple. The human mind stores knowledge in layers. Some of those layers are conscious, explicit, and easy to access. Others are intuitive, compressed, stored in shortcuts that you don't notice because you rely on them automatically. When you solve problems quickly, you're using those hidden layers. When you recognize patterns instantly, those layers are behind it. When you make decisions based on something that just makes sense, that something is actually a vast framework of reasoning you didn't consciously assemble. Feynman understood that most people underestimate these hidden layers because they never try to articulate them. They assume they lack understanding simply because they can't express it perfectly on the first attempt. But expression is a skill by itself, separate from the knowledge it reveals. So when someone struggles to explain, they think, "I don't truly understand this," when in reality they do. They simply haven't reorganized their thoughts into communicable form yet. This is why highly intelligent people often insist they're not intelligent. They confuse the difficulty of expression with the absence of understanding. But Feynman showed that explanation is not proof of intelligence. It is a tool to uncover it. Imagine you've learned something through observation, experimentation, or intuition. You grasp it deeply, but not in a way that feels verbal or structured. When someone asks you to explain it, you hesitate. Not because you're lost, but because you need to reorganize a whole internal system that has never been translated into words. Once you begin to articulate it, even slowly, even messily, you realize there's a coherent understanding beneath the surface. Feynman loved this moment. He saw explanation not as an academic exercise, but as an act of discovery. He often said that if you can't explain something simply, it doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you haven't spent enough time reorganizing your thoughts into clarity. And that reorganization often reveals connections and insights you didn't realize were there. One of his famous classroom habits was to ask students extremely basic questions, questions that seemed almost too simple. But he wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. He was trying to expose the hidden assumptions people carried. He wanted to push them toward the moment when they would say, "Wait, I do know this. I just never looked at it this way." He believed that simplicity was the strongest test of understanding. Not because it made things easier, but because it made the mind confront itself. And this leads to something about your own intelligence that you might not have noticed. When you struggle to explain an idea, it's easy to assume you lack depth. But the struggle is normal. It's natural. It's expected. Your mind has spent years building internal structures that work beautifully inside your thoughts, but were never designed to be spoken aloud. Bringing them to the surface takes time. Yet once you do, you uncover abilities you didn't realize you had, abilities that were always there, waiting to be articulated. This is one of Feynman's greatest gifts to anyone seeking to understand themselves. The realization that hidden knowledge is still knowledge. The realization that intuitive understanding is real understanding. The realization that intelligence isn't defined by how fast you can explain something, but by how deeply you've absorbed it. And if you ever doubt your own intellectual capacity, try Feynman's approach. Pick something you know well, anything, and explain it as if the listener is learning it for the first time. You'll see how much your mind has been holding quietly, efficiently, invisibly. You'll see that your brain has been building knowledge even when you weren't aware of it. This isn't just a technique. It's a mirror that shows you the intelligence you've been overlooking for years. Many people go through life convinced that their capacity is smaller than it actually is. That belief forms gradually, often beginning in childhood, shaped by teachers, relatives, classmates, and countless small comments that stay in memory much longer than they should. Richard Feynman often reminded his students that talent hidden under layers of doubt behaves like a light covered with cloth. The flame is present, yet the glow seems faint. Section 5 explores a mental posture that lifts that cloth and allows inner clarity to shine without distortion. A crucial element is curiosity without fear. When someone approaches ideas with caution, afraid of mistakes, the brain contracts into a defensive mode. In contrast, when questions arise naturally and playfully, neural circuits expand, connect, and recombine. Feynman frequently used everyday objects, spins of plates, wobble of wheels, drops of water, to illustrate this lively attitude. Through that simple behavior, he demonstrated that intelligence grows through bold observation rather than rigid perfection. Another key piece is emotional neutrality in front of uncertainty. Many people freeze when they hit a point they cannot explain instantly. They assume this obstacle proves an absence of capacity. In truth, that pause is fertile territory for insight. Accepting confusion as a temporary stage gives the mind freedom to rearrange information. Feynman treated confusion as a companion rather than an enemy, allowing it to push him toward clearer formulations. Self-talk also shapes intellectual expression. Inner criticism can silence powerful reasoning before it has time to take form. Replacing harsh internal comments with balanced statements, "I don't know this yet, but I can figure it out," changes cognitive output. The brain listens to every sentence you tell yourself. With supportive messages, it performs with far more agility and precision. Consistency matters as well. Not perfection, not pressure, just steady contact with ideas. Small sessions of learning, repeated gently, build strong mental structures. Feynman's notebooks show this pattern. Short notes, quick sketches, small analogies, each reinforcing the previous one. Over time, this habit transforms scattered understanding into solid mastery. Finally, humility paired with confidence creates an ideal state for intellectual expansion. Humility opens space for correction. Confidence ensures movement forward. Balancing both allows intelligence to unfold naturally, without arrogance or fear. Following this posture, the potential that once seemed distant becomes visible, functional, and unmistakably yours. There comes a moment when hidden ability stops waiting and begins to surface. It rarely happens during a test, a speech, or any situation loaded with pressure. Instead, it appears in quieter scenes. A late-night thought that suddenly connects two ideas. A simple explanation you give a friend that unexpectedly clarifies something you struggled with for years. An observation during a routine task that sparks an entire chain of insights. These small flashes are not accidents. They are signs that your mind has been working beneath awareness, shaping concepts, organizing memories, and building links you didn't realize were forming. Richard Feynman described this phenomenon with stories from his own life. He often said that understanding arrived while doodling in notebooks, playing with analogies, or revisiting questions that seemed trivial. Those ordinary moments were actually the birthplace of some of his sharpest realizations. The same quiet mechanism operates in every person. The brain rearranges information in the background, and when conditions align, clarity emerges almost effortlessly. One factor that triggers this emergence is relaxation. When tension drops, cognitive pathways unclench. Ideas flow with far more ease, and reasoning becomes smooth. Many people think brilliance requires strain, yet some of the best breakthroughs appear when the mind is calm. Another factor is honest engagement. When someone genuinely wants to grasp something, not to impress a crowd, not to check a box, but to comprehend, it sets off deep internal activity. That sincerity acts like fuel, allowing knowledge to settle and transform into something usable. Notice also how insight grows when there's freedom to explore paths that seem odd or unconventional. Feynman embraced this approach. He followed hunches, tested quirky analogies, and treated reasoning like a playground of possibilities. That spirit allows intelligence to unfold without restraint. Eventually, all these conditions converge. A once opaque subject becomes manageable. A skill that felt distant becomes natural. You finally witness a capacity that was present long before you recognized it. This revelation isn't a sudden creation. It's the unveiling of what was quietly developing inside you the entire time. There is always a final turning point in any journey of self-understanding, a moment when the mind stops hiding and starts revealing. It rarely arrives with fanfare. Instead, it comes disguised as a quiet realization, a subtle shift in how you interpret the world, or a sudden clarity that feels both surprising and strangely familiar. This is the moment when your true intelligence steps out from the shadows it has lived in for years and stands fully visible, no longer distorted by doubt, fear, comparison, or the belief that brilliance must look a certain way. People often wait for external validation to confirm their capability, a grade, a compliment, a result, a ranking. But authentic recognition doesn't begin outside. It begins when you finally notice that your mind has been mapping patterns, building frameworks and refining ideas long before you had the confidence to trust the process. That inner construction, unseen but constant, is what eventually produces a clear and undeniable awareness. I understand this now. Not because someone told me I'm good at it, but because I can feel the structure inside my own thoughts. Richard Feynman talked about this with humor and humility. He never portrayed intelligence as a dramatic revelation. Instead, he described it as a natural consequence of playing with ideas, questioning assumptions, explaining concepts in simple terms, and embracing the freedom to be wrong without embarrassment. Through these habits, he believed the mind slowly exposes its deeper layers. And when those layers become visible, you begin to understand yourself in ways that no test score or external measure could ever capture. This final moment of recognition often appears after a sequence of frustrations. You spend hours trying to decode a topic, wrestling with confusion, feeling stuck. Then, unexpectedly, something aligns. A connection forms. The mental fog clears. The exact thought that previously felt impossible now feels almost obvious. But the ease is misleading. It is the result of accumulated effort, curiosity, and persistence blending together to create clarity. When this happens, you start seeing patterns in places where you once saw randomness. You notice relationships between ideas that previously seemed isolated. You express concepts with ease, not because you memorized information, but because you built a personal framework of understanding. Your mind starts trusting itself. There is a deep, calm confidence in that. Not loud, not arrogant, just steady. Another transformation becomes visible at this stage, the ability to think independently. Instead of repeating what others say, you begin forming interpretations based on your own reasoning. You start asking better questions, more precise questions, questions that reveal how deeply your mind has been observing the world. This independence is one of the clearest indicators of genuine intelligence, the capacity to produce thought rather than merely consume it. You may also notice a shift in how you respond to challenges. What once felt intimidating now feels intriguing. Difficult problems no longer trigger doubt. They awaken curiosity. You begin viewing obstacles as invitations to explore rather than threats to avoid. This shift is powerful. It is the mental equivalent of discovering strength you didn't realize you possessed. In this final stage, you also learn something essential. Intelligence is not fixed. It is elastic, adaptable, and constantly evolving. Every new insight becomes a stepping stone for the next one. Your understanding expands not in a single leap, but through a chain of moments, small clarities, modest breakthroughs, glimpses of comprehension that eventually form a complete picture. That picture is the version of yourself you were always capable of becoming, but had not yet fully seen. And when you finally reach that point, you look back and realize that your mind had been leading you there all along. It was never hiding your intelligence to punish you. It was shaping it, refining it, strengthening it quietly, until you were ready to see it clearly. Now that you recognize that inner capability, the question becomes, what will you do with it? Before you go, tell me in the comments, what's one moment when you realized you were smarter than you thought? I'd love to read your story.